Hey all, I am Jordan, a program manager on the Visual Studio for Mac team. Today we're going to talk about what's new in Visual Studio 2022 for Mac. I am a white male in my mid-40s, blonde hair, wearing a blue shirt, and behind me is a kind of purple room with musical instrument and some pictures of some of my favorite musical artists. So let's dive on in and talk about what's new in this release. So today I'm going to cover, for those of you not familiar with Visual Studio for Mac, what it is. And we'll also get into what's new in this latest release, which is Visual Studio 2022 for Mac. And then we'll wind it up with talking about what's coming next in our version 17.1, which is the preview release that's out today. So Visual Studio for Mac, this is our .NET IDE for developers working on the Mac. It's celebrating 5 years as of build. And we support building out applications for the web with ASP.NET Core or the cloud, building mobile applications with Xamarin and soon .NET MAUI, as well as building out games using Unity. And it's got some Azure functionality sprinkled in as well for publishing your apps to Azure, working with Azure functions to build out serverless applications. We just released Visual Studio 2022 for Mac, and this release is focused on being a fast and fluid and modern .NET IDE. For us, that really means embracing a fully native macOS UI, as well as we swapped out the front of the application to do that, and the backend we also swapped out running on top of .NET 6 now. And this comes down to faster load times for your projects, faster, more fluid movement throughout the IDE. And you can now build applications using .NET 6, as well as the IDE is natively supporting Apple's M1 processor. This is the ARM64 processor that Apple supports. So this release is new today. We're going to dive in with a demo here in just a moment, but there's a link on here where you can download it and start using it right away. So I mentioned fast and fluid being a big focus of this release. A really good demo that's hard to show live, but I'll run here is running the application on an M1 device. Here you can see on the left side is the new version of 2022, and on the right is the previous release of 2019 loading a solution on, this was a MacBook Air running an M1 processor. And as I was going, we were already up and running and coding in 2022 before 2019 even had launched. Now you can see that now we can get to editing code in 2019. So almost half the time you can more quickly get up and running in this release. With that, let's dive into a demo of what's new for the IDE. So here we have the welcome screen for 2022. A real simple demo I like to do right away when I mentioned being a fully native macOS UI is actually, if you watch what happens when I change up the IDE, the theme of the OS, what happens back in the IDE. So I can choose the dark theme and the IDE responds appropriately, or light. And this takes place throughout the IDE across the entire surface of it. So every control in the IDE is now fully native macOS UI, and the native thing is like full screen mode. This, changing your themes just works smoothly. And I'm going to leave it on dark because that's one of my favorite themes to use. But this goes also to support for Apple's tools like accessibility tooling. So voice control and voiceover also just work across the IDE now, thanks to that fully native UI. And I mentioned some of the projects you can create. I'm going to go in here and we're going to choose to create a new project just to show you some of the options we have. So I mentioned being able to build out web applications. You can do web and console apps using .NET 6. Mobile apps, .NET MAUI is coming soon. There's a little bit of a sneak peek here, spoiler alert. And Xamarin, where we can continue to build out mobile applications using Xamarin, as well as Azure Functions. The IDE now supports Azure Functions v4, so you can actually build out these Azure Functions on .NET 6. And if you happen to work with Unity in the Unity editor, you can go ahead and choose to edit your C# scripts in Visual Studio for Mac, and you have tooling to be able to debug those and work through those and bounce back and forth between Unity tools. So I'm going to switch back to the IDE, and I've got a project open here. This is the .NET Podcast application, one of my favorite sample applications. We're going to go ahead and run this, and it's backed by a number of services all running in Docker. And I was playing around with some of the functionality in this application to be able to, you can browse podcasts through it and then be able to subscribe to them or unsubscribe. You should see it pop up here on the screen, and I'm going to go to the set of featured podcasts here So in the background, you can see Visual Studio for Mac's responding. We're seeing in the application console a number of messages coming through. In this case, I'd mentioned I was debugging the subscribe, unsubscribe functionality. So subscribe and then unsubscribe, and you'll see the IDE jumped to the breakpoint where I was last at in the source code here that I had set. So we're debugging the unsubscribe function, and I can take a look at the variables running through what's passed into my method, be able to do the stuff you're used to using for debugging. I like to show this just so you see the end-to-end working in the IDE. And again, it's some of the same functionality you had in 2019, but now all native macOS UI. Now, one thing I noticed while I was in here was this little light bulb icon popped up. And we're going to go ahead and stop debugging our app. And this will show us another new UI in this release, which is our preview window here. The light bulb comes up when there's a recommendation for a code change that you should consider making. You'll also see another icon sometimes comes up. It's more of like a wrench icon. These are some suggestions that you could make changes to your code, but not as strong a recommendation as the light bulb. And in this window here, this is a new experience in this release, a fully accessible preview window showing us the impact of applying these quick actions or refactorings to my source code. And in this case, I'm going to go ahead and choose to take this one, which is changing to an explicit type instead of using the var declaration. I can preview what'll be the impact of this code change. I could actually apply it to all occurrences of this error in my recommendation in my source code. We're just going to pick that. You see the change made here. And let's assume I fully tested this out. It's all ready to go. I feel confident that we can go ahead and make this change. I could then go into the new Get Changes window. And this brings forward an experience from Visual Studio on Windows some of you may be familiar with, an integrated Get Changes window where you could come in and be able to preview changes you've made to the source code. I could look at the history of the file. I could go ahead and stage this and prepare a commit to make and commit it all from right here in the IDE. This is an example of one of our goals with Visual Studio for Mac, that you should be able to move between the IDEs. If you're doing, say, some Android development over on Windows, and you like to use your Mac, say, from the couch in your living room to work on the back end of the application, you could move between the tools and have a similar functionality like the Get Changes window that you're used to using, kind of work the same between the two products. This is a whole new UI from the way we did Get Changes in the prior release. And it is another example of one of those kinds of points of similarities with Visual Studio that are increasing in this release. And another example would be, say, the menus here. We've got changes on our terminology that are more similar or aligning with what you're used to on Visual Studio on Windows. So another point toward when I mentioned having a more fluid UI in the product that's similar to functionality in Visual Studio on Windows is the ability to take tool windows and drag and drop these and move them around the IDE. So I could go ahead now and move these more easily to different spots in the IDE using functionality similar to what we all know and love from Visual Studio over on Windows. We just covered a number of things. Again, Visual Studio 2022 for Mac, available today, focused on being a fast and fluid, modern macOS IDE. Again, you can build .NET applications working with it for .NET 6, running on Azure Functions v4 if you want to use that for your microservices, and natively supporting Apple's M1 processor. Now let's take a moment and talk a little bit about what's next for the IDE. So Visual Studio for Mac, we just also put out version 17.1, which is the next preview release of the IDE. And this is available today, and it includes support for building out .NET MAUI applications. This is in preview, and .NET MAUI just went GA, and the tooling is now available to preview in this release of Visual Studio for Mac. We'll also have support for .NET 7 preview is coming soon that we're working on. And this release is one where the really big focus for us is around addressing top feedback from customers, both from the initial 17.0 release of 2022 that we just walked through, as well as some long-standing issues. One example here being the behavior of the IDE when you look with large Git checkouts or running a pull of changes from your Git repo. In 2019, the IDE could react in some unexpected ways. There's some performance issues and just other bad behavior that could occur. That will be an example of one of these top points of feedback we've heard that we're going to be fixing in 17.1. And that will really be the big focus. That finishing moving some of the longstanding UI of the IDE over to native macOS UI. There are a few features left, like the task window, the task list window. Those are the sorts of changes you'll see, but really focused heavily on improving the quality, addressing top feedback, and then also continuing our work around performance and reliability and ongoing improvements there. So there's a link at the bottom here where you can go ahead and go download that preview release today. So that's really the main thing I've got for our kind of quick run through of what's new in this release. There's both 17.0 is now fully is available. This was the initial 2022 release, fully supported. It can replace your 2019 environment. You can download it now and install it. And then 17.1 preview is also available. So if you want to learn more about this, a little deeper dive into the changes in the release or what's coming in 17.1, you can finally look at this last link here around our release blog post and kind of get all the details there. Go try it out today. Thanks everyone for joining me. I hope you have a great rest of build, and we will talk to you soon. Take care.